The Aston Martin Valhalla is crazy fast, but it needs to sound better our drive in a prototype of Aston's forthcoming PHEV supercar. Revealed brilliant dynamic resolution, as well as the limitations of its 7,000 RPM redline. If there is an ideal environment for driving a new 1,000 horsepower supercar for the first time, this isn't it. My dream scenario would be fast, flowing roads or a famous racetrack bathed in glorious sunshine. But Road and Track's initial encounter with a near-production version of the Aston Martin Valhalla actually takes place on the short, bumpy, and highly crash-able Stowe circuit at Silverstone, a miniature course within the better-known Grand Prix, track that the luxury automaker uses for development work. Stowe packs only tight corners and short straights into its diminutive 1.1-mile length. Not optimal for a car designed to deliver massive downforce and high-speed thrills. Also, to add to the Englishness, it is raining heavily when I arrive for my short drive. The existence of the Aston Martin Valkyria denies the Valhalla some of the sense of specialness it should carry. The new car's Cosworth engine predecessor keeps it from claiming to be the first street-legal mid-engine Aston, or the fastest around any given racetrack. But the Valkyria was an outlier, one that wears its Aston Martin identity lightly, an Adrian Newey passion project that was mostly engineered by the legendary designer's then employer, Red Bull Racing's Advanced Technologies division. The Valkyria is also much too extreme for regular road use, with a cockpit that fits like a race suit and so much noise and buzz from the car's structural V12 that it requires occupants to wear noise-canceling headphones to protect their hearing. The Valhalla is very different. Aston's take on a usable supercar. It was originally intended to be another Aston Martin Red Bull co-production, and to use a freshly developed V6 hybrid powertrain. You can see the very different first proposal in this corporate video. But Aston's acquisition of what became its own Formula One team led to a divorce with Red Bull, and development of the Valhalla was brought in-house. Back in 2021, the company showed a new concept using an AMG-sourced V8 and a triple-motor hybrid system. That's the car in late prototype form I'm driving here. The speed of this fast-moving part of the market makes it a little hard to work out just where the Valhalla is going to fit. Simon Newton, Aston's Director of Vehicle Performance, says that the Ferrari SF90 Stradale was a key benchmark rival, but that car is about to be replaced. More obvious current alternatives are the Lamborghini Revuelto and freshly launched Temerario, both of which also use the same powertrain layout of a multi-motor hybrid system with electrically powered front axles, as does, of course, the forthcoming Chevrolet Corvette ZR1X, which promises more power than any of them, although Aston hasn't confirmed pricing. The Valhalla's circa $1 million starting point means it will be more expensive than all of those alternatives, nearly 5 times as much in the case of the Vet. That's a chunky supplement. Alternatively, you can flip the equation and consider the Valhalla against the 1,200 HP all-wheel drive Ferrari F80, the one you need to be on Maranello's list of special customers to buy. Both are limited-run models, $799 in the case of the Ferrari. No more than $999 for the Aston, yet the Valhalla is only around a quarter of the Ferrari's base price. The specs of the near-production Valhalla have changed only slightly over those of the car that was shown in 2021. Power comes from a flat-plane crank version of AMG's for 0.0-liter twin-turbo V8, the same base engine that was used in the 2021 AMG GT Black Series. In the Aston, it makes 817 horsepower in its own right, 97 horses more than the Black Series, with a pair of electric motors on the front axle and another integrated into the gearbox, adding up to another 247 horsepower between them. That's a total system peak of 1,060 for horsepower. The electrical side of the powertrain is supplied with power by a compact 6.0 kWh battery pack that can be recharged from a socket, as well as by the engine, but which Newton confirms will only deliver a minimal EV-only drive range of less than 8 miles. The other big change since 2021 is the arrival of a vast rear wing, which can both sit flush to the Valhalla's rear bodywork and rise from it to find and exploit cleaner airflow, the wing element itself moving actively to manage downforce levels. Aston says the car will be able to make in excess of 1320 pounds of downforce from 149 miles per hour to the 217 mph top speed. But on the short, sodden circuit, I won't be experiencing much of the hand of God. The line separating Aston's front-engine models often seem a little blurred, but nobody is ever going to confuse the companies to mid-engine models. The Valkyria is pretty much all compromise. The tiny passenger cabin and skeletal structure making clear all is secondary to raw speed. The Valhalla is a much more conventional supercar. Okay? So, some of the design cues are a little on the nose. None more so than the Valhalla's actual nose, where Aston's trademark radiator grille has been stretched beneath the front bumper. On the prototype I drove, the grille bars were finished in a less obvious black, which worked all right. But shinier finishes are also available for buyers who want to celebrate the Aston connection at the cost of giving their cars a fishy grid. The Valhalla's cabin plays on the same familiar but different theme. Getting into an Aston Martin through butterfly hinged doors is definitely a novel experience, as is the commendable lowness of the seating position once on board. But settled into the driver's seat, there are lots of familiar components from elsewhere in the range. The Valhalla's steering wheel is a flattened squircle rather than truly circular. But the control layout on its spokes is identical to lesser Aston's, as is the touchscreen in the center of the dashboard running the company's home-brewed UI system, the stub-eager change selector, and the rotary drive mode dial. Having experienced a specification session at Aston's Gaydon HQ, I know that the Valhalla can be made more luxurious, even given tweed trim. But the prototype at Silverstone was all business, with naked carbon fiber on almost every surface and uncarpeted floors. In its bare-bones state, it didn't feel like a $1 million cabin. But even plusher materials aren't going to alter details, like the stuck-on-looking digital instrument pack, which sits directly behind the steering wheel without any surrounding fascia. From the prototype's driver's seat, the vibes felt closer to Lotus than Ferrari. Before driving, I rode a few laps shotgun as Newton introduces the car and talks me through its dynamic modes. By hybrid supercar standards, these are relatively simple. Aston hasn't adopted separate programs for chassis and powertrain settings. The Valhalla always starts in sport mode, where the V8 starts and stops as required. A full EV mode can also be selected, which limits speed to around 80 miles per hour. I won't be wasting my precious track time using it. Sport Plus and track modes both keep the engine running full time, with track keeping the battery level topped up to allow for longer stints on a circuit. Naturally, the modes also tweak settings for myriad adaptive systems dampers, the torque biasing, rear differential, the front-to-rear power split, and the active aerodynamics. There is also an ESP off mode, which de-energizes the stability control and switches to a variable traction control system. The intervention threshold managed by turning what was previously the drive mode dial to vary the TC from overprotective to hold my beer, with the system turned right down. Newton deftly demonstrates the ease with which the Valhalla surrenders rear-end grip on the damp surface. My 2 stints at Stowe were not enough to attempt a detailed verdict, which will wait until we get the Valhalla to some of the wide, open spaces it was designed for. But the mini-track was sufficient to prove Aston's second supercar is capable of both huge acceleration and impressive stability. The way the Valhalla delivers performance took a little while to get used to. As you would expect given the numbers, it is toweringly fast, with near-instant responses thanks to the ability to add electrical power even as the V8's turbochargers are spooling up. Aston says the Valhalla doesn't make its 640 pounds of T-torque peak until 6,700 revolutions per minute. The closely related GT Black Series made its maximum at just 2,000 revolutions per minute. But that number doesn't reflect the way the car feels in terms of mid-range potency. Shifting well short of the red line made little difference to the subjective rate of acceleration, and the car was happy to carry higher gears through the tighter corners. But the Aston lacks the subjective savagery of some high-revving alternatives. Most obviously Lambo's screaming 10,000 RPM-capable Timmer aero. The Valhalla's V8 meets its limiter at a very un-supercar-like 7,000 revolutions per minute, and met it too often at Silverstone, where a lag on the digital instrument display meant the engine would often encounter its spark cut before the red change-up bar. The top of the digital display illuminated, of course. Getting it done mid-range muscle is arguably an entirely Aston-appropriate trait for the development team to have carried into the new car. But noise and the lack of it was a definite disappointment. From my short drive, the prototype spoke with much too soft a voice. Driving with a helmet muffled the sound of the V8 to the extent it was often barely there. But even lapping more slowly without a lid proved the cabin to be unexpectedly muted. Standing next to the track as somebody drove by revealed that rushing air and tire noise made up a bigger part of the soundtrack as the car approached than the exhaust note did. In a part of the market where buyers want loud, visceral thrills, this will be an issue. But the very nature of a prototype is that it isn't finished, and the development team may be able to find some more oral thunder without sacrificing the Valhalla's ability to pass increasingly stringent drive-by noise regulations. And we also noted the Ferrari F80 to be much quieter than its predecessor. Newton's admission that the prototype software was about 85% to final sign-off also means tweaks can still be made. One change he promised is snappier calibration for the 8-speed dual-clutch transmission, even in not quite finished form. The Valhalla's chassis and dynamic systems put together a virtuoso performance. The prototype managed to find traction for a high percentage of the powertrain's fury without drama, but also proved it possesses a sense of fun. I started out pretty gently in these slippery conditions, and in many ultra-powerful mid-engine cars, I likely wouldn't have got a whole lot faster. But trust built quickly in the Valhalla. The steering, although low-geared by modern supercar standards, was rich in communication. The electrically driven front axle and active rear differential working invisibly to help the car turn and find grip on the Michelin Pilot Sport S5 tires. The optional semi-slick Sport Cup to South would have been much less forgiving in the conditions. Closing parenthesis. Newton says the Valhalla is on track to weigh 3,650 pounds without fluids, slightly below the corresponding figure for the Temerario, but still a big chunk above the typical weight of a non-hybrid supercar from a few years ago. But even on the tight-fitting track, it didn't feel heavy or unwieldy. Stowe didn't have any corners quick enough for the aerodynamics to make a serious contribution. But I could still see the active rear wing switching into its air brake configuration in the rear view mirror at the end of the longer straights. Switching between the different drive modes revealed big differences. The gentlest, Sport, kept the prototype pretty much locked down, allowing only the slightest hint of yaw on the low grip surface and defaulting to a safe, if unexciting, understeer attitude if pushed in these slower corners. Sport Plus is much more liberal, what Newton refers to as the fun mode, allowing some power on sliding while still intervening cleanly before the car got too far out of shape. Race mode is cleaner and more clinical, intended to maximize pace, on track rather than encourage showboating. I spent the most time in Sport Plus and also had some fun with the variable traction control function. Of course, as always with such systems, it is hard to imagine too many owners regularly choosing to drift their $1 million Valhalla. But the depth of engineering required to make it feel so effortless at the limit is considerable. Pushed to break away, it felt more friendly and less snappy than the Vantage I'd been sent out in first to learn this circuit with 400 fewer horsepower. Much impressed about this first taste of the Valhalla, but in other areas I felt underwhelmed. The finished car may end up sounding better, but software tweaks aren't going to significantly alter the layout of the minimalist cabin or raise that lowly redline. Is it special enough to compete in what is already a very well-stocked Bond in terms of dynamics? There's a good chance it will be, especially once we get to experience it at speeds that bring the massive downforce into play. Can it deliver on all those other reasons people buy supercars? Beyond the commendable novelty of wearing an Aston badge, the jury is still debating that one.